What if I told you that everything you think you know about yourself is just an elaborate performance? That the person you believe yourself to be is nothing more than a carefully constructed mask, designed to hide the most essential part of your existence? Carl Jung spent his entire life studying the human psyche, and what he discovered about the soul will fundamentally change how you see yourself and everyone around you. He uncovered something so profound, so unsettling, that most people spend their entire lives running from this truth. You see, Jung didn't just study psychology, he studied the soul. And what he found there was both terrifying and liberating. Most of us walk through life believing we are one unified person. We have our personality, our preferences, our way of being in the world. We think we know ourselves. But Jung discovered that this sense of unified identity is an illusion. What we call self is actually a collection of different parts, different voices, different aspects of our being that are constantly in conflict with each other. Jung called this phenomenon the structure of the psyche, and at its center lies what he considered the most important discovery of his career, the soul, or what he termed the psyche in its totality. But here's what will shock you. Jung believed that most people never actually encounter their own soul. They live their entire lives in relationship with what he called the persona, the mask we wear to navigate the social world. The persona is not your true identity. It's a survival mechanism. It's the version of yourself you present to get approval, to fit in, to avoid rejection. And here's the devastating part. Most people become so identified with their persona that they forget there's anything else underneath. Think about it. How much of what you call yourself is actually just a response to what others expect from you? How much of your personality is genuine, and how much is performance? Jung observed that people who live entirely through their persona experience what he called persona inflation. They become convinced that the mask is their true face. They lose touch with their authentic self, with their soul, and they begin to feel empty, disconnected, like they're living someone else's life. But here's where Jung's work becomes truly revolutionary. He discovered that beneath the persona lies what he called the shadow, the repository of everything we've rejected about ourselves. All the thoughts we've deemed unacceptable, all the emotions we've been taught to suppress, all the aspects of our nature we've been conditioned to hide. And beneath the shadow, in the deepest layers of the psyche, Jung found what he believed to be the most sacred part of human existence, the self, with a capital S. Not the ego self, not the persona self, but the self that Jung described as the totality of conscious and unconscious, the divine spark within each human being. This self, this soul, is what Jung believed we are all ultimately seeking. It's the source of meaning, of purpose, of authentic identity. But here's the tragedy. Most people never find it because they're too afraid to journey through the darkness of their own shadow. Jung understood that the path to the soul is not through spiritual bypassing or positive thinking. It's through what he called individuation, the process of integrating all parts of yourself, including the parts you've been taught to reject. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really consider this. What parts of yourself have you been hiding? What aspects of your nature have you been taught are unacceptable? What would happen if you stopped performing and started being? Jung believed that the modern world has created what he called a collective neurosis, a society-wide disconnection from the soul. We live in a culture that rewards the persona and punishes authenticity. We're taught to optimize ourselves, to brand ourselves, to present our best face to the world. But in doing so, we lose touch with what Jung considered our most essential nature. He observed that people who are disconnected from their soul experience a particular kind of suffering. Not the suffering that comes from external circumstances, but the suffering that comes from being estranged from their own essence. This is what Jung called the suffering of meaninglessness. You've felt this, haven't you? That sense that despite all your achievements, despite playing all the right roles, something essential is missing. That feeling that you're living on the surface of your own life. Jung discovered that this suffering is actually sacred. It's the soul calling you home. It's your psyche demanding integration. It's life itself asking you to become who you really are. But here's what Jung understood that most people don't. The journey to the soul is not comfortable. It requires what he called holding the tension of opposites. It means accepting that you are both light and shadow, both persona and authentic self, both conscious and unconscious. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Why terrifying? Because when you truly accept yourself, you can no longer hide behind your persona. You can no longer pretend to be someone you're not. You must face the full reality of your being. This is what Jung meant when he spoke about the soul. The soul is not some abstract spiritual concept. It's the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, acceptable and unacceptable, beautiful and ugly. The soul is your wholeness. Jung noticed something fascinating about people who had begun the journey toward their soul. They became more authentically themselves, but they also became more mysterious, more complex, more difficult to categorize. They no longer fit neatly into social expectations because they were no longer trying to. These individuals had what Jung called psychological sovereignty. They were no longer controlled by the opinions of others, no longer driven by the need for approval, no longer enslaved by their persona. They had found their center, their authentic self, their soul. But Jung also discovered something that might surprise you. He found that people who are connected to their soul become more compassionate, not less. When you stop judging your own shadow, you stop projecting judgment onto others. When you accept your own complexity, you can hold space for the complexity of others. This is because the soul in Jung's understanding is not separate from other souls. At the deepest level of the psyche, Jung believed we are all connected through what he called the collective unconscious. When you touch your own soul, you touch something universal. Jung spent years studying what he called active imagination, a technique for communicating with the unconscious. He discovered that when people learn to listen to their inner world, to pay attention to their dreams, their fantasies, their spontaneous images, they begin to hear the voice of the soul. This voice doesn't speak in the language of the ego. It speaks in symbols and metaphors and images that bypass rational thought and touch something deeper. Jung believed this was how the soul communicates with us, how it guides us toward wholeness. Let me ask you, when was the last time you listened to your inner voice? Not the voice of your fears, not the voice of social conditioning, but the quiet, steady voice that knows who you really are? Jung discovered that people who ignore this voice for too long begin to experience what he called the unlived life. They become haunted by possibilities they never explored, paths they never took, aspects of themselves they never developed. This unlived life becomes a source of regret, resentment, and depression. But here's the beautiful part of Jung's discovery. It's never too late to begin the journey toward your soul. Jung himself didn't begin his deepest psychological work until his late 30s, during what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. He realized that his entire professional identity, his persona as a successful psychiatrist, was keeping him from his authentic self. He had to be willing to risk everything, to appear foolish, to be misunderstood in order to find his soul. Jung wrote extensively about what he called the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to bridge opposites and create new possibilities. He believed that when we stop trying to eliminate our contradictions and instead learn to hold them consciously, something new emerges. The soul reveals itself in the tension between opposites. Think about your own contradictions. The ways you are both strong and vulnerable, both confident and insecure, both loving and selfish. Jung would say that these contradictions are not problems to be solved, but polarities to be integrated. When you stop trying to be perfect, when you stop trying to present a flawless persona to the world, something remarkable happens. You become real. And in becoming real, you give others permission to be real too. Jung observed that authenticity is contagious. When someone has the courage to drop their mask, it creates a field of permission for others to do the same. This is why authentic people are simultaneously more comfortable to be around and more challenging. They reflect back to us our own inauthenticity. This brings us to perhaps Jung's most radical insight about the soul. He believed that individual psychological development is not separate from collective healing. When you do the work of integrating your shadow, of dropping your false persona, of connecting with your authentic self, you are not just healing yourself, you are contributing to the healing of the collective unconscious. Jung saw the problems of the modern world, the wars, the hatred, the environmental destruction, the spiritual emptiness, as manifestations of our collective disconnection from the soul. He believed that the work of individuation, the work of becoming authentically yourself, is actually a form of service to humanity. When you stop projecting your shadow onto others, you reduce the amount of unconscious hatred in the world. When you stop living through a false persona, you model authenticity for others. When you connect with your own soul, you strengthen the spiritual fabric of humanity. This is why Jung's work is not just psychology. It's a path of awakening, a method of transformation, a way of serving something larger than yourself while paradoxically becoming more yourself than you've ever been. Jung spent the latter part of his life studying what he called the religious function of the psyche. He discovered that humans have an innate drive toward meaning, toward transcendence, toward connection with something sacred. But he realized that this drive could not be satisfied by external religious forms alone. It required a direct encounter with the numinous, with the sacred dimension of one's own soul. What Jung found particularly fascinating was how the soul communicates its presence through what he called synchronicities. These are meaningful coincidences that seem to arise from nowhere, connecting your inner psychological state with outer world events in ways that feel too perfect to be random. Jung believed these synchronicities were the soul's way of confirming that you're moving in alignment with your authentic path. Have you ever noticed how when you're truly being yourself, when you're connected to something deeper than your everyday persona, life seems to flow more naturally? Opportunities appear, the right people show up, doors open in unexpected ways. Jung would say this isn't luck. This is the soul orchestrating reality to support your authentic expression. But Jung also discovered something troubling about modern life. He observed that most people live what he called provisional lives. They tell themselves that they're just temporarily living this way, that someday they'll pursue their real dreams, express their authentic selves, follow their soul's calling. But that someday never comes. They die, having never fully lived. Jung believed this provisional living was a form of psychological suicide. You kill the parts of yourself that are most alive, most authentic, most essential, in service of maintaining a safe, socially acceptable persona. And in doing so, you not only rob yourself of your own life, you rob the world of your unique contribution. Think about this. What dreams have you put on hold? What parts of yourself have you declared impractical? What would your life look like if you stopped living provisionally and started living as if your soul's expression mattered? Jung encountered this pattern repeatedly in his clinical practice. Successful people, people who had achieved everything society told them to want, would come to him in the midst of what he called the noonday demon, or what we might call a midlife crisis. But Jung understood this crisis differently. He saw it as the soul's rebellion against a life lived in service of the persona rather than authentic self-expression. These individuals had spent decades building impressive facades, accumulating achievements, playing roles that earned them respect and admiration. But internally, they felt hollow, disconnected, as if they were sleepwalking through their own existence. Jung recognized this as what he called the symptom of the unlived life crying out for attention. He discovered that this crisis, painful as it was, represented a profound opportunity. It was the soul's way of demanding to be heard, of insisting on its right to exist and express itself in the world. Jung called this the call to individuation, the psyche's demand that you become who you actually are, rather than who you've been pretending to be. But Jung also understood why this call is so frightening. To answer it means risking everything you've built in service of your persona. It means potentially disappointing people who have invested in your false self. It means facing the terrifying possibility that the real you might not be as acceptable, as successful, as lovable as the performed version. Yet Jung observed something remarkable about people who had the courage to answer this call. Initially, their lives often became more complicated, more uncertain. They might leave careers that no longer served them, end relationships that were based on false pretenses, abandon identities that had become psychological prisons. From the outside, it looked like they were falling apart. But Jung understood that this apparent falling apart was actually a falling together at a deeper level. What looked like crisis was actually transformation. What appeared to be destruction was actually reconstruction around a more authentic center. Jung wrote extensively about what he called the night sea journey, drawing from mythology to describe the psychological process of dying to your false self in order to be reborn as your authentic self. Like Jonah in the belly of the whale, the soul must sometimes enter a period of darkness, confusion, and apparent dissolution before it can emerge transformed. This process is never comfortable, but Jung believed it was essential. He observed that people who tried to maintain their personas indefinitely, who refused the call to authenticity, eventually experienced what he called a sterility of the soul. They became increasingly rigid, defensive, and disconnected from life's vitality. On the other hand, those who surrendered to the process of individuation, who allowed their false selves to die so their authentic selves could be born, experienced what Jung described as a renewal of life energy. They became more spontaneous, more creative, more genuinely present in their relationships. Jung also discovered that this process of soul retrieval has profound implications for how we understand success and failure. The persona-driven life defines success in external terms: achievements, recognition, accumulation, status. But the soul-connected life measures success differently: authenticity, meaning, depth, genuine connection. This shift in values often looks like failure to the outside world. Someone might leave a prestigious career to become an artist, or choose a smaller life that allows for deeper relationships, or prioritize inner development over external advancement. Jung understood that what looks like stepping down might actually be stepping up into a more authentic expression of who you are. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who you think you should be, not who others want you to be, but who you authentically are in your essence." So I ask you, are you living as your persona or as your soul? Are you performing your life or living it? Are you connected to your authentic self? Or are you still hiding behind a mask? Jung's invitation is both simple and revolutionary. Come home to yourself. Stop performing. Start being. Embrace your contradictions. Integrate your shadow. Listen to the voice of your soul. The world doesn't need another perfect persona. The world needs your authentic self, your unique perspective, your particular way of being human. The world needs you to have the courage to be who you really are. Because when you find your soul, when you stop hiding behind your mask, when you integrate all the parts of yourself you've been taught to reject, something miraculous happens. You don't just become more yourself, you become more human. You become a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, between the individual and the collective, between the personal and the sacred. This is Jung's ultimate message about the soul. It's not something you have to find outside yourself. It's not something you have to earn or achieve. It's already there, waiting for you to have the courage to meet it. Your soul has been calling to you your entire life. Through your dreams, through your longings, through your dissatisfactions, through your moments of deep meaning, it has been inviting you to come home to yourself. The question is not whether you have a soul. The question is whether you have the courage to answer its call. Jung believed that this is the great work of being human. Not to live a perfect life, but to live an authentic one. Not to be who everyone expects you to be, but to be who you actually are. Not to hide from your complexity, but to embrace it. This is your invitation. This is your soul calling. Will you answer? Your authentic self, your integrated self, your soul-connected self is not a destination you'll someday reach. It's a way of being you can choose right now. It's available to you in this moment, waiting for you to have the courage to drop the mask and step into the truth of who you are. Because when you do, you won't just see identity differently. You'll see everything differently. You'll see the sacred in the ordinary, the meaningful in the mundane, the divine in the human. You'll see with the eyes of the soul. And once you do, There's no going back to the small, safe, performed version of yourself. There's only the infinite, authentic, soul-connected you. Are you ready?